Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans. No big intro here, but just want to tell you this is trying something new here on the channel. This is all of the draft pick and even the undrafted free agent breakdowns that I've done all in one video. So if you don't want to go clicking around or if you missed one, you can go start to finish from Kamari Lassiter to the undrafted free agent guys in this video all at once. You can just let it play all the way through if you'd like. And this is going to be in podcast form over at Houston Football. So if you want to just listen to it, Houston Football, you'll need to be a paid subscriber to get it in the podcast form, or you can watch it right here on YouTube. Let it roll in the background as you take care of whatever you need to take care of. I appreciate you watching. And I appreciate all of you telling me about how you have been visiting with our friends at Platinum AC and Heating. My guy Dwyane will take care of anything that you need from an AC perspective. If you need repairs, if you need replacements, if you need to just get the AC tuned up and ready for the long summer ahead, Dwyane will take care of you. Give him a call today, 832-777-3683, 832-777-3683. It's where you can find my guy Dwyane, just like you. He's local here in Houston. He's a big Texans fan. Have him out, have him look at your AC, and then talk some ball with Dwyane as well. You won't be disappointed. Appreciate everybody checking out Platinum AC and Heating. Appreciate them for sponsoring this video and all the videos that they have sponsored to this point. And I can't wait for you to dive in on the entire Texans draft class breakdown and the undrafted free agents. It's coming your way right now. Look, there's some versatility to his game. He had a successful career at Georgia, 3 years into the NFL. Kirby Smart earned a ton of praise from Nick Caserio. He said that Smart's one of the best defensive back coaches in college. The other name he mentioned was Nick Saban. Saban's not in the game anymore, so now Smart's the best defensive back coach in college, according to Nick Caserio. And one of his best players in the defensive backfield is now on the Houston Texans. But how do we see Lassiter fitting in right away with this group and with this crew? Well, I put together an infographic, and I always have this, and I send it out from time to time. It's the entire roster. It's everybody on the roster with the Texans. The rookies are in red. New additions via either trade or a signing from free agency are in green. And here is that cornerback room. So you see on the list there, obviously, Derek Stingley and Desmond King, because they were in there before some of these other guys. Jeff Okudah, C.J. Henderson, Miles Bryant, and Mike Ford added to the team. Obviously, Chris Byrd and D'Angelo Ross have been around the organization as well. Those are special teams heavy type of players. Troy Pride's a special teams guy. And then, of course, Kamari Lassiter there for you to look at as well. So trying to figure out exactly what to make of where Lassiter fits. So let's move over here and go up a little bit. Here are all the cornerbacks, and here's the 3 cornerback spots. So you've got, obviously, Derek Stingley. Let's go ahead and put him at cornerback 1. We know that Jeff Okudah and C.J. Henderson are getting the first crack at cornerback 2, and right now I'm going to put Desmond King as the starting nickel. I know that a year ago, going into the season, he was going to be on the cornerback depth chart, going to be on the roster, and he got cut. The Texans added him back in the middle of the year, and he played pretty darn well when you start thinking about that. So I would tell you, as we kind of estimate, look ahead, and guesstimate, Derek Stingley is on the team, obviously, and Desmond King is on the team, and, of course, Kamari Lassiter's on the team. I'd go ahead and tell you one or the other makes it between Okudah and C.J. Henderson. I don't know that you need to keep both of these guys, but ultimately I keep it around 5 or 6 cornerbacks if we're talking about this cornerback room. And I would go ahead and tell you Mike Ford's making the team as sort of that special teams specialist. So I'm going to put him here below Okudah and C.J. Henderson. So we know for sure there's 4 spots taken up right now, and then where Kamari Lassiter fits in. Well, he doesn't fit in behind Derek Stingley necessarily because he's not challenging Stingley. But if Stingley was hurt, maybe Lassiter fits there. He fits as the backup to Derek Stingley right away. One of Okudah or Henderson wins the job at cornerback 2, and then Desmond King is your nickel cornerback with, let's say, Kamari Lassiter as the backup as well. So he's the backup nickel, the backup cornerback 1. And right off the bat, when you start to think about what Lassiter needs to get used to at the NFL, understanding the defense, I mean, Desmond King's got a head start on Kamari Lassiter. Okudah and Henderson, having been in the NFL, have a little bit of a head start on Kamari Lassiter. Would I love for him to be where Jeff Okudah is, or to be challenging Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson right away? Absolutely, but let's be realistic about this. I mean, yes, he's a highly touted corner, one of the top 8 or so corners in this draft, according to the prognosticators, but he's still a rookie. You still got to get used to the NFL. So trying to figure out exactly how that cornerback room is put together, Stingley at cornerback 1, Lassiter backing him up, Okudah or Henderson at cornerback 2, and then Desmond King with Kamari Lassiter backing him up. Now that leaves, let's just say, 2 spots here to figure out with this cornerback room. Well, Miles Bryant can play a little bit of inside, a little bit of outside, maybe play a little special teams there for you. And then it's up to maybe, like, let's say Chris Boyd ends up there as the cornerback. So there is your cornerback room, so to speak, with only one of Okudah or Henderson making it. Now, if we wanted to get really excited about what Kamari Lassiter brings to the table, we put him into the competition with cornerback 2, Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson. I mean, could you see him competing right away with these 2 guys? I mean, let's be clear about where Okudah and Henderson are in their careers. Former top 10 selections, now on their 3rd team. There's no extreme financial investment in either one of these guys that if you felt like you had to keep one of them because you spent some money, I would tell you the special teams money investment on Ford makes me feel like he's for sure making this team. But could Lassiter fight his way into that cornerback 2 spot? And here's the big thing about this cornerback room as we sort of look at it. Look, Lassiter can play outside, he can play inside. Desmond King played outside for the Texans, but he can play inside as well. Miles Bryant, he can play inside and outside. There's a lot of versatility to this defensive back room, and that sort of helps Kamari Lassiter, but also hurts Kamari Lassiter a little bit as well. Because think about this. If King can go inside-outside, if Bryant can go inside-outside, if Lassiter can go inside-outside, you spend some time inside and outside. You spend some time inside and outside in training camp working both sides, so you don't always get the perfect amount of work at that spot. I'm going to tell you that right away, I like Okudah a little bit more than Henderson. We'll throw Henderson back here. We'll go Lassiter as the key backup for both these spots, and this is our cornerback room as we're kind of predicting and thinking ahead on this. Derek Stingley at cornerback 1, Jeff Okudah at cornerback 2, Desmond King as the nickel cornerback, Kamari Lassiter as your key backup at cornerback 2 or your key backup at cornerback 1. So there's 4 spots. Miles Bryant as a backup, Mike Ford as a backup, and Chris Boyd as a backup. Well, if you've got the backup interior guy, you got the special teams ace, you got another special teams ace, that means Miles Bryant is out of a gig here. And there's your 6 cornerbacks. These 3, the rookie, and these 2 backups. And that's 6 cornerbacks. The Texans had 5 cornerbacks at times last year. I do think that when you think about the cornerback spot, you have to think about special teams usefulness. I wouldn't think about that for Lassiter. King could do some returning for you, obviously. But Boyd is a special teams guy. Ford's a special teams ace brought onto the team for that very reason. You got to think about the special teams when you're thinking about the depth at the cornerback spot. We know Stingley's not going to play special teams. We know Okudah's not going to play special teams. Ideally, King and Lassiter aren't playing special teams. So then you got those other 2 spots. Got to have special teams to them. Boyd had some nice moments on special teams at the end of last year, and Ford had some, obviously, special teams ace-type things when he was added to the roster. That's the kind of player that he is for this team. Now, I was a little surprised, not totally surprised, that the Texans went with an offensive lineman. I felt like perhaps they could select an offensive lineman at that spot, but I thought maybe the 3rd round would have been where they would go for it. Ultimately, listening to Nick Casario's comments about how there was a run on cornerbacks, I do wonder if the potential for a run on tackles spooked him a little bit, and Casario kind of started the run on offensive linemen. 13 offensive linemen drafted before the end of the second round and into the third round after Caserio selected Fisher. So he wanted his guy. He went and got his guy. Would I have maybe liked Kamari Lassiter's teammate, Javon Bullard, a little bit more? Sure. Caserio also revealed that they thought about taking USC safety Calen Bullock, who they ultimately drafted in the third round with that selection. But they still got that player. They get Blake Fisher. And as Caserio's talked about, you need tackle depth. And certainly this team needs tackle depth. Now, it's a little bit of a mixed bag here with Fisher. I like that for the most part, Caserio got to swing at the top of the tackles that were available. Fisher was the 9th tackle taken in the 2024 NFL draft, and so Caserio kind of had his lay of the land when it came to the player. He got to pick from a variety of different tackles, and teams like the Chiefs, Ravens, and Colts all took tackles after Caserio took Fisher, so it's worth paying attention to how those players develop over the next couple of years. So I like that he got to pick the guy that he wanted from that group of tackles. Here's the mixed bag about that. Caserio's been up and down on offensive line evaluation in his time running this team. You think about the investment in Kenyon Green in the first round, was supposed to be a no-doubter at guard, was supposed to be able to go right away from day one and play at a high level, and that just hasn't been Kenyon Green. You think about Shaq Mason and the extension that he got before he even played with the Texans whatsoever, and he's been okay. I don't know that he's totally lived up to that extension. And then Titus Howard has been a rough one on the new contract, and Caserio has allowed him to be played at left guard, where Howard admittedly is not very good compared to when he plays at right tackle. So unnecessary extensions for Mason and Howard, and then the miss on Kenyon Green. That's the bad. Let's flip it around to the good for Nick Caserio. Well, he found George Fant off the street as training camp got going last year, and that was your tackle depth, and that's a big-time proven player in George Fant, who's played a lot of football both at left tackle and at right tackle. Kendrick Green was a nice fill-in addition until he got hurt last season. Josh Jones was a nice, they traded a draft pick for him, but he was a nice fill-in addition, played a little guard, played a little tackle for this team as well. And then the big hits for Caserio were actually his draft picks a year ago. You think about what Juice Scruggs was able to do once he got healthy, but perhaps the best explanation of Caserio nailing it from an offensive line standpoint was Jarrett Patterson getting forced into duty at the center spot after the multiple injuries to centers ahead of him, and then him turning out to be a pretty nice center until he, of course, got injured and missed the rest of the season. So a little up and down when it comes to the evaluation of prospects. It's not been good on the higher-priced stuff, like the first-round pick on Green, the big contracts to Howard and Mason, but in the lower commitment, the lower-priced stuff, so a second round with Juice Scruggs, a late rounder with Jarrett Patterson, Caserio's had some hits. The small trades to get Kendrick Green and Josh Jones, Caserio's had some moments and some positives. So let's take a look exactly how Fisher fits in 2024 as we think about this offensive line. Of course, we'll go to the Google Doc here, where I've got all the Texans roster put together. Green players are new additions via trade or free agency. Rookies are in red, of course, but we're going to look at the offensive linemen, which there are quite a few offensive linemen on this team. So let's jump over here to the O-linemen and start putting it together. Well, we know 3 spots for sure when those players are healthy. We know that Laramie Tunsil is the left tackle. We know that Titus Howard's going to be the right tackle. And we know that Shaq Mason is going to be the right guard. Now, these next 2 names, I would tell you that these next 2 names are the leaders in the clubhouse for these 2 spots. Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson both played well last year when they got to play, and I would say that they're leaders in the clubhouse to be the left guard and center. For the sake of this exercise, which we're really kind of talking about the tackles, let's go ahead and drop those guys into that spot. I know that Patterson played center more last year. I know Scruggs played guard more last year, but for the sake of this exercise, let's say Scruggs goes back to the position he was drafted to play, and Patterson played well enough at center that maybe he carries that over to guard. Now, the Kenyon Green, the Kendrick Green conversation Nick Broker, Dieter Iceland, and things like that. We'll have those conversations later. What we want to learn about is the tackle situation. Now, if the Texans had to play tomorrow, there is your backup left and right tackle. That's Charlie Heck. But here's Blake Fisher in the conversation. Now, again, Fisher is not here to play guard. Fisher is here to play offensive tackle. He played one game of left tackle at Notre Dame, then an injury cost him his left tackle spot to Joe Alt, who was the 5th overall selection in this year's draft. And then he played a bunch of right tackle and played pretty darn well, actually. Finished with a career start streak, and the health wasn't a big concern. So, again, this is if they had to play tomorrow. This is where Fisher kind of fits in. Now, my question would be, as a potential project player, okay, as a potential project player that maybe needs a year of seasoning in the NFL before he really takes that next step, is Fisher going to be the type of guy that can overtake Charlie Heck and take over that backup tackle spot? Because the thought of a rookie offensive tackle at right tackle or left tackle, it's a little scary to me. Now, Fisher, again, has potential, big-time prospect, and then when you think about how he could grow into the position, you think about a guy that has some potential to eventually be a right tackle or a left tackle for this team, and not just the third tackle, the swing tackle. Now, David Sharp's name is in here as well. Sharp has primarily played as a backup offensive tackle. He's not played a ton, actually, in an offense for Carolina recently as he came over in free agency. So, really, you're looking at these 3 names for 2 tackle spots and then backing up Titus Howard and Laramie Tunsil. Now, in the perfect situation, Fisher's the third tackle all year long, and you never need him. But unfortunately, last year, Laramie Tunsil had a bulky knee and he had off-season surgery. Titus Howard had 2 separate injuries that cost him most of the season, and the team played an additional, I think, 5 guys at the tackle spot, including Michael Dieter, Jaron Christian, Josh Jones, Charlie Heck, and I'm missing one. Oh, George Fant, the really solid veteran option that Caserio snagged at the beginning of camp. Now, it's worth noting you get a couple extra weeks of training camp because you're going to play one more preseason game than everybody else. So maybe Fisher is going to be ready to take over at that third tackle spot. But as we look at it here, Charlie Heck was really bad last year when he finally got in there. Now, the team brought him back, and maybe getting further away from the injury that he had and having a full training camp and a full real off season and things like that, Heck's going to be a much better player. But once he was actually on the field last year, he wasn't very good. So now we're thinking about Fisher maybe being the key backup. And that's if Titus Howard, he's starting, is on schedule. If Titus Howard is behind schedule, and let's say that, he's injured and not in the equation, are you playing Fisher at right tackle with Charlie Heck as the backup? Are you playing Charlie Heck at right tackle with Fisher as the backup? It's not easy to figure out exactly how he fits in 2024. I'm skeptical that he's going to be able to hold down that backup spot unquestioned and without some sort of concern for him being a younger player who's a more developmental type player, and especially if they've got to put him over at left tackle where he hasn't played a ton in the past few seasons. I know he played a little left tackle at Notre Dame, but it's a little left tackle, and it's in college. He's been primarily a right tackle, and if you're the swing tackle, you got to be able to go at left or right at a moment's notice. So the offensive tackle depth is a big question mark for this team, and hopefully my skepticism is met with Fisher answering the bell and answering the call for this team. And that could be where he ultimately ends up in 2024 as the swing tackle for this team. Plays a little bit because Howard gets dinged or Tunsil gets dinged, something of that nature, and services okay when he's in the game. Now, the scary part would be if the Texans don't trust him to play tackle right away. He's there as the fourth tackle with no ability to kind of be a backup at another position because, again, Nick Caserio has said he's a tackle. And you start to think about, okay, Heck can't play guard. He can't play guard. Do you have enough backups for when guards or centers get injured on this team? And it starts to get a little dicey there. But again, that's a bad case scenario for the Texans. The best case is that you don't really use this guy in 2024 because the 2 tackles that you hardly invested in are nice and healthy throughout the course of the season. So how does Calen Bullock fit this Texans defense? Well, when you start to think about the excitement that Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans had when you saw it cut to TV after they were able to draft Calen Bullock, and Caserio mentioned after the draft that he was even thinking about taking Bullock with their second round selection. Ultimately, they went with Fisher, the tackle out of Notre Dame. You could see that the Texans were really excited to get Bullock and add him to the equation at safety. And when you start to think about who the safeties were that were available at that point, he fits exactly what the Texans needed for this safety room. His ability to go and get the ball, make plays, to play that center fielder spot at safety is going to be so valuable for this defense, and they haven't had somebody that they can consistently rely on to do that in this defense. Last year, they tried to make it work with Jimmy Ward and Jalen Petrie and Eric Murray, but you could never really get everybody healthy all at once. But it feels like this team is going to put Bullock out there, trial by fire, stick him out there, let him be the center fielder, and figure it out. He's got those type of skills. Let's dig a little bit deeper into exactly how the Texans can use him. This, of course, is the Texans defense. The green additions, or the green names are additions via free agency or signing. And, of course, the red is the rookies, and you'll see the safeties right here. Let's go over here and take a look at this safety spot. Now, really, what you're thinking about with Bullock and what you're thinking about with these safeties is mixing and matching the safeties. D'Amico Ryans can play around with which safety he wants in which position, because if Jimmy Ward is healthy, if Jalen Petrie's healthy, and obviously Bullock and Eric Murray are healthy as well, D'Amico Ryans has got a lot of different ways he can go with using an extra safety on the field. Now, remember last year, prior to Eric Murray's injury, D'Amico Ryans used him quite a bit in 3 safety looks. And I think in large part that was because they trusted him and he could play some of that center field that you sometimes needed from the safety spot. So they trusted him. So there's 3 safeties that D'Amico Ryans trusts to put on the field right away. So when you look at that, you could look at something like a Ward, Petrie, and Eric Murray trio. And that's the trust trio. That's the 3 guys that I would feel like D'Amico Ryans trusts the most if they had to play a football game, say, tomorrow. And then Bullock gets to sit and wait and watch and learn and ask questions and all of those fun things. And we know Jimmy Ward came over to the Texans primarily to play safety. He doesn't want to play a lot of nickel cornerback like he did in his final little bit of time there in San Francisco. So let's start thinking about using Jimmy Ward only as a safety, and then let's figure out how we put Bullock on the field. Well, Bullock, in a lot of people's opinions from the scouting perspective, they feel like he could definitely help at that nickel corner spot, that they could go down there, defend a third wide receiver. And certainly with his speed and play anticipation, and sometimes that third wide receiver not always being the best wide receiver on the team, he can go out there and make a play on that. So, Jimmy Ward and Jalen Petrie back there as the traditional safeties, and then Bullock jumping down to be the that slot defender. Maybe it's a tight end, and he needs to keep up with him. He's not a small guy by any means. I mean, physically, he needs to put on some weight and get stronger. I think Bullock's talked about that, and so has Nick Caserio. But using him in this way is a fun way to think about it. Or let's put Jimmy Ward back there. Let's put Calen Bullock back there with Jimmy Ward, and then let's let Jalen Petrie go roam around and go be an athlete, go be a tackle machine, dart in there, make some plays like we saw him do 2 years ago, and we didn't see him do as much this past year. I mean, I just remember from Jalen Petrie's 2023, I remember missed tackles. I remember blown assignments. I remember just looking lost sometimes when they marched him up to the line of scrimmage, and that's just not going to work in 2024. So just unleash Jalen Pitre as that tackle for a loss machine, blitz him, and let Bullock and Jimmy Ward sit back there and kind of play center field. Let them go back there and just have that defense in front of them and kind of watch and see how things work and go out there and make plays. Because think about this. Like the safeties, yes, they're important, and they need to be good in 2024. And DeMeco Ryans has talked about how they need consistency and health out of that group. But if the cornerbacks impress more than they did last year and the defensive line takes it to a whole nother level, you're talking about a job that is much easier to do at the safety spot than it was for portions of last year. And ultimately, we're looking at 3 safeties here, but just having depth that you can count on. You know, you play Jimmy Ward and Jalen Pitre, and then you have Murray, Bullock, and maybe another name like Lonnie Johnson, who's here for special teams, or maybe MJ Stewart. You have that guy there as sort of your 5th safety. There's some depth, you know, with Jimmy Ward having been banged up last year, with Pitre maybe, you know, sometimes needing an attitude adjustment, sitting on the bench a little bit, and Murray having been banged up last year. The depth at this position, I mean, there's no more DeAndre Houston Carson coming off the street towards the middle of the year, end of the year, and having to play in the playoff game against the Baltimore Ravens. Like, you've got guys, hopefully, in Bullock, Johnson, Stewart, Murray, Pitre, Ward, that are here all year long that you can rely on. That even if Jimmy Ward's out for, say, you know, a week or two, well, boom, we'll just put Calen Bullock in his spot. We'll put Jalen Pitre on the field, and then Eric Murray's our guy that we can play around with as that 3rd safety. He can come in, maybe he takes Petre's spot, okay? And then Pitre is, again, that blitzing athlete, and we got Bullock playing center field. So just looking at this, DeMeco Ryans has so many different things that he can play around with the addition of Bullock, that he probably didn't have access to when he was putting guys in who didn't know the defense, who hadn't had time in this defense, who you couldn't go out there and trust to do some high-level stuff. I mean, look, the defense, if it's better up front in the front 7, if the cornerbacks can take care of their business, again, safety is going to be easy. But if you could take these safeties and you could stop, you know, to use a teaching example, if you could stop having them do algebra and start having them do trigonometry, I mean, that really opens up the board for DeMeco Ryans to make a lot of interesting moves from a schematic standpoint, and allows them to do some more things that they couldn't do last year because of injuries, poor performance, and things like that. Bullock's fit is super easy to see, and I don't have any question about how he helps them right away with his playmaking ability, the success that he had in intercepting the football in college. You can put him on the field, stick him out there in center field, and let him just kind of watch how things come to him, and then make the other 10 guys on the field right with his play on the back end of that defense. That's what I feel like you can do with Calen Bullock and what he brings to the table. Let's talk about Cade Stover and why I like him so much and why I believe the Texans got themselves a steal. He was not the 3rd tight end taken in this draft. There's actually a number of tight ends taken before Stover that I think it's an absolute joke that those players went ahead of Stover, including Ben Sinnott, who went to Washington. A.J. Barner was drafted ahead of Stover as well. And some of those guys just don't have the high upside that Cade Stover possesses. Yeah, it was a little expensive going out there and getting him. Cost the Texans a future 5th-round pick. Nick Caserio was happy to pay that price to go out there and get a key member of this offense going forward. And you're saying to yourself, Cody, he's a rookie tight end. You say on the channel all the time about how it's one of the hardest positions for rookies to make the transition. How is he going to be a key member on the offense right away? Well, he doesn't have to be the tight end on the offense. He can help out in a variety of ways. He can work in 2 tight end sets. He can work when Dalton Schultz needs a break as the primary tight end. You can do a lot of fun things with Cade Stover. His pass catching prowess is fantastic, and it's fantastic compared to some of the other tight ends that have come out in recent years, and we'll dive into the advanced numbers here in a moment. But he's also a willing blocker that knows he needs to get better. It's one thing to not be a good blocker and try hard and not know what you're doing wrong. Stover at the scouting combine, when I'm standing there talking with him, he's explaining to everybody, yeah, when I did this blocking, I didn't block well. When I did this, I didn't block well. I know I need to tune this up. I know I need to fix this. He's a super coachable guy that has improved every aspect of his game year over year over year, and he's just getting started at the tight end position. There's untapped potential to Cade Stover, and we may not even see that potential get tapped into until the second or third or even fourth year with this Texans team, but there's a lot of untapped potential there. For a variety of reasons that I like him, I feel like he fits. Let's hear why Nick Caserio likes him. Here was the general manager talking about Stover after the 2024 NFL Draft.
Whatever it is, it's elite. I mean, this guy is as tough and hard-nosed a player that they had in the program. Just kind of going back to the question and D'Amico's answer about developing players, I'd say Cade's a good example of a player who has only played tight end for 2 years, so he's certainly not a finished product, but he has the mindset and the work ethic to improve. I mean, how he was raised. I mean, this guy is everything you want in a football player and then more. I mean, he probably played hurt this year. I mean, I think he had an MCL or had an issue where, quite frankly, it would have limited some other players, but he just braced it up and he just kept playing football. So, I mean, I don't want to speak for D'Amico, but I think we feel the same way. This is probably one of our favorite football players in the entire draft, regardless of position, because of his mentality, because of his mindset. And he still is developing as a player. I mean, 2 years ago, he was playing defensive end in the Rose Bowl against Utah. Now he's, played tight end for 2 years, and here he is getting picked in the bottom of the fourth round. And his position is, we think tight end. That's why we drafted him. So, but I mean, blue collar as they come, and from a makeup, traits, toughness, mentality. I mean, this is an elite guy.
It's an elite guy, and you heard all the things Caserio talked about. The development is still getting in there. Here's some things to take a look at with Cade Stover. Somebody asks in the comment section, is he good on the injury now? Yeah, he's fine. He's fine. He's good on that standpoint. Let's take a look at Stover's season this past year with the Buckeyes. He's got a couple of zeros in there. When you have a zero at a big place like Ohio State versus Youngstown State, that's okay. He probably didn't play that much because they probably blew them out. But he's got a 90-yard receiving game. He's got a 66-yard receiving game on 2 receptions, 53 on 4, 70 on 4. Look at these yards per reception, his average here, 18, 33, 13.3, 17.5. He has the knee injury during the Penn State game. He has a 0 performance here in Wisconsin, sits out the next week, comes back after he got hurt, and fires off 7 for 79. He finishes the year playing in the bowl game, didn't play a ton, with another 0 there against Missouri. Didn't have to play in the bowl game, but he decided to play in the bowl game. And you're saying to yourself, yeah, Cody, those receiving stats, they're not that good. 576 and 5 touchdowns, that's not that good. Let's take this into account here. Now I'm going to pull up Ohio State's 2023 receiving stats. Let's take into account the fact that Ohio State's quarterback stunk. They don't throw the ball to their tight ends that much. And for 2 consecutive years, that's right, the 2 years that he played tight end, Nick Caserio talked about it, okay? For 2 consecutive years, this guy was 3rd in receptions at Ohio State. And this past year, he had as many receptions as Ibuka, who is going to be a first-round pick next year. And if he'd come out this year, probably would have been a second-round pick. Stover was the number 2 option tied with a big-time wide receiver. And he only had, 25 or so less than Marvin Harrison, the number 1 option. And he had more than a 5-star guy like Carnell Tate, who plays for Ohio State. He had more than a guy, Julian Fleming, who plays wide receiver, has been around Ohio State. There's a lot of untapped potential to him as a pass catcher, which is really exciting. And I feel like one of the most exciting aspects of it is, in addition to just seeing that he played well in the midst of an offense that doesn't throw the ball to the tight ends, he played well in the midst of an offense that had other options. The advanced stats compare to some of the best offensive production tight ends that we can think of. The advanced stats, okay, yards per target. This is my guy Scott Barrett, who does fantastic work for Fantasy Points. Yards per target, 6th best of any Power 5 tight end since 2015. Bowers, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, and Irv Smith Jr. are the only ones that had better yards per target. His yards per route run, higher than anybody that's not Brock Bowers in this year's draft at the tight end position. Like, he is an untapped receiving potential monster. On top of that, he blocks better than you think he does for his size, and he's going to get bigger in the NFL, and he's going to get better technique, and he's going to be more fine-tuned. He's a guy that is not going to have parts of his game lag when it can be improved via coaching and technique. Now, how does he fit into the Texans' room in 2024? Well, Brevin Jordan and Tegan Quintiriano need to worry about their jobs. And maybe it's Brevin Jordan, maybe it's Tegan Quintiriano, maybe it's a simple one. Hey, Tegan Quintiriano, you can't stay healthy. You haven't done anything well at the NFL level. You move on. Brevin Jordan, you're the primary pass guy. Stover's kind of the half and half. And then Schultz does tight end one stuff for everything. I mean, Brevin Jordan, don't get me wrong. He had the best Brevin Jordan year that he had of his NFL career, but this guy still only had 219 yards. Yes, I understand he had 90 or 75 yards in the playoffs on that one big play. That was his only catch in the playoffs. His blocking is average at best on a consistent basis, and sometimes it's poor. His pass blocking sometimes gets you killed. He was terrible pass blocking against the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs. Like, Brevin Jordan, in the final year of his contract, like, he's not guaranteed to be on this team over Cade Stover. And then I would tell you, I said that about Brevin Jordan. I don't really need to say much about Tegan Quintiriano because he hasn't stayed healthy to be on this team. So as far as Stover goes, you can put him on the field in 2 tight end sets. You can put him on the field as the blocking tight end while Schultz goes out there and runs routes. If Schultz needs a breather, you can put him out there as the solo tight end and have him block as that 6th blocker, or have him go out and run routes because he's a productive, still learning route runner. And then as you start to see Dalton Schultz and Cade Stover over the next couple of years, they turn into, I would think Stover's going to learn a lot more about the tight end position. They turn into a really fearsome duo at the tight end spot. And ultimately, when you want to move on from Dalton Schultz, you save a couple bucks because things start getting expensive because CJ Stroud's getting a contract and Will Anderson's getting a contract and you've paid Nico Collins and Tank Dell's getting a contract. Like, when things start to get expensive, Stover will be ready to take over for Dalton Schultz and be that pass-catching tight end. It's going to be a really fun player to watch in 2024, and you may not see him as much as I want to see him in 2024, but by 2025 and on, he's going to be a consistent and key member of this offense. And the potential, my God, folks, we are just scratching the surface on the potential of what Cade Stover brings to the table as an offensive weapon. Okay? It's up to him to fix the blocking, make it better. I believe in this guy. All that stuff Caserio talked about, he might as well have just said he's super coachable, because that's how Cade Stover comes off. And the stuff that's gotten better for him at Ohio State year over year, it's going to get better in the NFL. He's going to get better coaching, and they're going to have him ready to impact this team in 2024. And he's going to be able to impact the team either at the expense of Tegan Quintiriano, which I feel like is the likely scenario, or at the expense of Brevin Jordan, which I feel is a little bit less likely in the scenario. But here's what I know. Cade Stover is a really fun pick. The Texans potentially got a steal, and they're going to have at least 2 tight ends that can catch the ball really well in the coming years with him and Dalton Schultz under contract beyond this season. Let's start with the player over on defense. Jamal Hill from Oregon, the first 6th-round pick that the Texans made. He is a safety that's converted to linebacker and played his final season at Oregon at the linebacker spot. Now, you hear safety converted to linebacker, and that may not impress you that much. But Hill is a former safety turned linebacker for Oregon that recruits at a very high level and has had some big-time linebackers and some highly touted recruits come through there at the linebacker position. And his head coach Dan Lanning is a former college linebacker, graduate assistant at Alabama, coached linebackers at Georgia. So when Dan Lanning trusts you to move from safety to linebacker, I trust you a little bit more than your typical DB to LB conversion. So with Hill, right away from the jump, he took to the spot like a duck to water. Pun intended, because he played at Oregon. But he had a phenomenal first game as a linebacker against Texas Tech, where he notched some tackles for a loss, some pressures, and had a really nice game in what was a high-scoring back-and-forth affair that the Ducks were able to pull out. And then over the course of the season, he put together a pretty solid performance at linebacker. Now, how does he fit in, and how does he potentially become a gem for this team? Well, the safety turned linebacker with the athleticism and the coverage abilities, if he's a cover guy that can come in as a backup when you need him and go out there and cover a slot receiver, cover a tight end, and be a difference maker with his coverage, that's something that I'm not sure Henry To'o, Jake Hansen, or some of the other linebackers that the Texans have on the depth chart can for sure say is in their tool belt right now. Now, again, this isn't about starting with Christian Harris and Azeez Al-Shire. This is about how can you impact the team on the two deep right away as a sixth-rounder, and with his coverage ability, should they need to call upon him from a defensive standpoint. I feel like Hill certainly can bring something to the table from that standpoint. And hearing him talk about special teams, doing whatever needs to happen, his skill set, you usually find guys at linebacker and DB filling out some of the special teams. His skill set, when you think about the new kickoff rules and punt coverage, the Texans have been one of the better units in football over the past couple of seasons from special teams overall, with a change to kickoffs and then the emphasis that they put on those players helping out on special teams. Hill really feels like he could be a player that finds himself a role, sticks to it for a year or two, and then should you need to call upon him because Christian Harris needs to miss a week or two, or Al-Shire needs a week off or two, injuries happen, maybe he's a guy that you could turn to right away with a discernible skill that some of the other linebackers don't necessarily have, and that's why I'm excited about Hill. Now, he's the defensive potential gem in the late round. The offensive potential gem has big-time potential. I am very excited about the player nicknamed Jaws. Jawhar Jordan from Louisville, the running back for the Cardinals last year. I'm very excited to see what he can bring to the table. He was a guy that did a lot at Louisville. He's actually the starter for the Cardinals this past year. His backup, Isaac Garindo, had an incredible workout at the Combine. Jordan didn't. And then Garindo went a couple of rounds ahead of Jordan, even though he was the backup and played a little bit more towards the back end of the season. But Jordan was no slouch himself as the starter for the Cardinals. Last year, he amassed over 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns as the starter, ripping off 6.2 yards per carry as one of the better players in the ACC at the running back position. Now, stats and success in college, that's not wholly and totally what gets me excited about Jordan. It's the potential fit for him in this offense. When you read about Jordan and you understand some of the positives to his game, and Dane Brugler from The Athletic is the guy that I focus on a lot because he does these deep dives even on players way down in the draft like Jordan. Brugler feels like Jordan's the perfect fit for a zone scheme. He'll know what to do, he'll make decisions, and he'll consistently get you yards. He'll hit singles, doubles, ultimately hit triples, and then home runs with his ability to see where he needs to go in the zone scheme. Now, Jordan has some special teams usefulness, obviously. He has a kickoff return for 98 yards, a kickoff return for 100 yards for touchdowns. So there's some potential for him to help on special teams. And as I say all of that, compare him to the player that he might be fighting for the roster spot come training camp. That's Dameon Pierce. Well, Dameon Pierce had a tough time figuring out this style of offense, knowing what to do once the ball got into his hands. And his special teams usefulness is a lot lower. I know he had the one return in the regular season, and he had one of the better plays of his season with that special teams return, but he wasn't consistently out there on special teams, and he wasn't even getting opportunities on special teams or in the offense late in the year. So if Dameon Pierce struggles to figure out this offense and show some of the issues that caused him to have a slump in his sophomore season with the Texans. If that happens and Jordan showcases some of those abilities to understand the zone scheme, hit the zone scheme, turn those singles and doubles into triples and home runs, and then showcases a little bit more speed than he showcased in the workouts. Jordan himself said on social media that he was a little banged up at the combine. That's why he didn't run as fast as he wanted to, but he's put some fast times on the clock before. And when you watch him at Louisville, there's no shortage of speed. You don't accidentally end up with a 100-yard return, a 98-yard return, and a bunch of big explosive plays at Louisville because you're slow at the running back spot. So I'm excited about Hill because he has an element to his game that some of the linebackers on the depth chart don't necessarily have right away. But I'm really excited about Jordan. And you think about some of those players, late-round picks that the 49ers used to add to the equation that turned into consistent, helpful players. I think about Elijah Mitchell, a late-round running back pick that the Texans nabbed one time, that the 49ers nabbed one time, that turned into a consistent contributor, even though they had guys on the roster. And again, with Jordan, he's just there to change pace with Joe Mixon, and maybe a couple of years from now, Mixon moves on, Jordan's ready to take over that mantle for him. And if not, he stays a change of pace back. You find a new running back to take over Mixon's spot. It's always nice to have multiple options at the running back position. The Texans haven't had multiple options at the running back position for a very, very long time. It's been one of the weaker spots in this organization for the past few years, and it was one of the big weaker spots last year when you didn't have Devin Singletary on the field, even sometimes when you did. But when you didn't have Devin Singletary on the field, you couldn't run the football last year. This team's got to run the football better to help out the O-line, help out C.J. Stroud, and make sure that passing game is even more dangerous. So if that uncut gem that is Jawhar Jordan can turn into a late-round gem that's helping out this Texans team in 2024, that's an exciting thought to have about the sixth-round pick. So a couple of sixth-round picks that maybe can help out this Houston Texans team in particular ways in 2024. I certainly am excited to see what Hill and Jordan can bring to the table. Let's start with the big fella on the end, Solomon Byrd from USC. Going to be 25 years old this year, played at Wyoming and then ultimately played at USC for the Trojans, where three of his uncles actually played for the Trojans as well. Byrd is a relentless pass rusher. When you read about him and you watch some of the stuff that he was able to put together at USC, the motor is high and there's some explosiveness to him. And that's why you would see a situation like that guy getting added to the equation just in case. Because if D'Amico Ryans could grab a guy like that and fine-tune him into being a depth player that can be called upon should injuries pop up for this team, then you could see how there's a path for Solomon Byrd to hang around this organization and make the team as a seventh-round pick. Unfortunately for Byrd, you look at the defensive end spot, it's going to be tough for the big fella to make it. Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter, and Danico Autry are for sure on this team. Ali Gay's been around the team for a year, and obviously we remember what Derek Barnett did towards the back end of the season. And then if Dylan Horton is healthy after his bout fighting with cancer last year, he's got a shot to be on this team and absolutely be a factor. So when you think about a guy like Byrd, you think about him like in typical seventh-rounder fashion. Show up to rookie minicamp, impress. Show up to training camp, impress in your opportunities. There's an additional preseason game that the Texans are playing in because of the Hall of Fame game. Byrd should get a lot of work there as well. And what you've got to do is just kind of stick around in the back of coaches' minds, because when practice squad comes around or the Texans need something at that defensive end spot because somebody's a little banged up, something like that, you just got to hang around in the minds of the coaches if you're Byrd, and his relentless effort and pass rushing prowess should give him the opportunity to just stick around in the back of D'Amico Ryans' brain, defensive coordinator Matt Burke's brain, as the Texans think about their defensive end setup and situation. So Byrd with a little outside shot, but he's got to continue to showcase that motor, impress with the pass rush, and get a little bit better stopping the run, and maybe he's hanging around with this Texans team post-training camp. The other 7th rounder on the defensive line, a senior bowler, and was thought to be maybe a 5th or 6th rounder in a lot of draft prognosticators' minds. That's Auburn defensive tackle Marcus Harris. Harris is a really fun prospect. He had 7 sacks last season for the Tigers, led the Auburn team in sacks with 7. He's a little bit lighter than you probably would think about for a defensive tackle. I know he weighed in about 300 pounds at his pro day, but most people believe he's going to play and be at 285 for most of his NFL career. Lightning quick off of the step for Harris. He can go out there, dart through offensive lines, and go in and make a play. His size does present a little bit of a question mark when you start thinking about some of the bigger and more physical interior offensive lines. But for him, defensive tackle, a position the Texans didn't address early on in the draft, same thing as Byrd. Go out there, make a difference in rookie minicamp, make a difference in training camp, and just hang around the equation. I don't know that it's out of the question that Harris, if he showcases something, could be in the defensive tackle situation. You obviously got Khalil Davis and Kurt Heinisch, who played for this team last year. Foley Fatukasi, there we go. We'll get it one of these days. He came over from Jacksonville. I would think he's got an inside track to start. Tim Settle is a player they brought over in free agency from Buffalo. Mario Edwards is another player that was added in free agency. But look at this. I mean, it's Khalil Davis, it's Kurt Heinisch, it's Foley, it's Settle, it's Edwards, and then you're looking at Harris, undrafted free agent, Phildarius Payne. But Harris, I mean, all he's got to do is beat out a couple of guys to get into the defensive tackle conversation and rotation. And it wasn't that many years ago that Kurt Heinisch turned himself into a rostered player because he started as an undrafted free agent, performed well, and found himself on the roster. Again, wasn't that long ago that he did that. Maybe Harris has an opportunity there. I tell you what, pass rushing from the defensive tackle spot, you're never going to be upset about that from a defensive tackle prospect, and certainly from a 7th rounder. Finally, we go to the big fella on the offensive line, LaDarius Henderson, guard out of Michigan. Now, I know he played tackle for the Wolverines last year, but he primarily played guard. Nick Caserio said that he's going to play guard here at the next level with maybe a little tackle versatility. And so when you start thinking about how does he make a impact at the guard position for the Texans, well, he's got to showcase some of that nastiness that he had in his 5 years playing at college football. He's a longer-armed guard, which is something that is trending towards things that teams really want from their offensive linemen and their interior offensive linemen. He's got a tough battle because there's a lot of options at guard. But again, same conversation. Stick around. Versatility doesn't hurt you. Got to get the extra preseason game. But let's take a look at that offensive line situation. We know Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, Shaq Mason, and Juice Scruggs are on this team for sure. You got to imagine Jarrett Patterson's got a good inside track as well. But let's figure out the competition for LaDarius Henderson on the interior. Well, Dieter Iceland has been around this team for over a year now, and he'll be going into his 2nd season with the Texans. That's a guy that Henderson's got to beat out. Nick Broker was on the team all of last year when it came to the guard spot. He didn't play hardly at all. I don't think he actually got into a game, if I remember correctly, but Broker's been in the building. They actually added him after cutdowns last year. He's a former 7th rounder, just like LaDarius Henderson. Obviously, we know about the Green duo Kenyon Green and Kendrick Green. And then Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson are both competition at the guard spot as well. So as you see with Henderson, not super easy, but the versatility that he possesses, being able to play tackle in an emergency, playing inside as well, that's something that's the type of guy that can hang around the organization. Maybe he's a practice squad guy. You call upon him when you need him, or, hey, perform well in training camp and beat out some of those guys that have been around this team. You know, you're a draft pick. I know it's only a 7th rounder. But you're a draft pick. Some of these guys were added as low-cost, no-cost free agents, or they've been hanging around because they were a waiver claim or something like that. Just because the guy's been in the building doesn't mean that you can't go out there and take his spot if you're LaDarius Henderson. Let's hear from D'Amico Ryans, who was a former 2nd-round draft pick, but of course, he's been a coach for a few years now, and he knows there's more than one way to make a team. You don't have to be drafted.
conversation with all our undrafted guys as well as our drafted guys. To me, it's everybody attacks it the same. Like, you don't attack the situation different because you're drafted or because you're undrafted. There are a ton of guys in this league who have made it as undrafted players right now. Our starting middle linebacker, he was an undrafted player, and he's done really well for himself in this league. So it's a matter of just putting your head down and working, continuing to get better. Doesn't matter where you're selected. It's about what you do once you step onto the field, right? And a lot of guys, even though they may be drafted, a lot of guys haven't made it. A lot of undrafted guys have made it. So the opportunity is there for everyone, and that's always our message.
Opportunity gets going with rookie mini camp this weekend. Of course, we'll have coverage of that here on the channel and over at Houston Football. Let's start talking about these undrafted free agents. Let's talk about two players in particular. They're twins. They're both South Dakota State Jackrabbits, and that's the Yonke brothers. Jackson and Jaden Yonke, spelled Janke, but sounds like donkey. The Yonke brothers. We'll start with Jackson. He was rated 41st out of over 300 wide receivers that Dane Brugler for The Athletic ranked in his rankings in his pre-draft preview. And some of the positives that Brugler gives you about Jackson Yonke is that his size and route running is something that could be useful for an NFL team. He's not a small guy. He's well over 200 pounds, checks in over 6'2", in the height department, and the route running has been successful for him at the FCS level. He led the team in receiving yards 3 times while he was at South Dakota State. He's a little bit of an older prospect, so that's a knock against him. He's 25 years old, as well as the competition against him. The competition that he's had success against, it's the same knock for his twin brother as well. It's mostly been FCS competition that they have had their success against. But you play who's on the schedule, you play who your team plays. They don't get to decide who they go up against. But an opportunity as an undrafted free agent gives you a chance to check out some maybe higher level competition, some better players, and showcase your skills in rookie minicamp and throughout the offseason against a little bit better competition to showcase that, hey, you belong in the equation. Another positive for Yonke that's important for all undrafted free agents, he's got a little special teams usefulness to him, returned some punts at South Dakota State for the Jackrabbits. Now, his twin brother was ranked lower in the 300-plus wide receivers, but not that much lower, 51 out of 313, and he's got inside-outside versatility, does Jaden Yonke. Yonke played inside and outside for the Jackrabbits, was one of their best players this past season, a little bit better than his brother statistically this past season. And again, some of the same things that you would think are true about Jackson Yonke are true about Jaden Yonke. He's got good route running ability. He's a little bit bigger than some of the other wide receivers at that position. Not a super athlete, a little bit older. Obviously, he's 25 years old and played against the FCS competition and that level. So those are the knocks against him. But again, a positive for him, inside-outside versatility, success at both the slot and outside wide receiver, and special teams usefulness for him as well. That's the Yonke brothers, 2 of the 5 undrafted free agents that we're going to highlight. From offense, let's pop over to defense. Phildarius Payne from Virginia Tech. Now, Payne was ranked 115 out of 159 at the defensive end position by Dane Brugler in his pre-draft rankings. Now, why was he ranked as a defensive end? But when you look at the roster online, he's a defensive tackle. Well, he played defensive end at Nebraska. He then played defensive tackle at Virginia Tech, just 1 year playing for the Hokies, which was this past year, where he had a handful of sacks, a forced fumble in the bowl game, and was playing, yet again, a new position coming off of a very serious Achilles injury in 2022. So Payne's got some inside-outside versatility along the defensive line. Now, he's a much lighter player than some of these other defensive linemen. He doesn't look super small, but he checks in about 25 pounds or so short from that 300-pound mark that sometimes defensive tackles need to reach. But hey, if you can dart in there and get up the field and make some plays, coaches will find ways to showcase you. It's worth noting CBS Sports ranked Payne as one of their best undrafted free agents in the entire undrafted free agency class, and the Texans were able to scoop Payne up. He's got a lot of competition at the defensive tackle spot, including a drafted defensive tackle in Marcus Hall from Auburn that he's going to have to fight. But again, just an opportunity. Stick around, make some plays, get in the coaches' minds, and have them thinking about you when it comes to practice squad time or that final roster cut down if you can. Moving back a level on defense, going to the linebacker spot. And this player is really intriguing to me. You heard D'Amico Ryans talk about an undrafted linebacker. Well, here's an undrafted linebacker that's super productive and actually pretty darn athletic for a undrafted linebacker, and that's Max Tooley from BYU. Now, he's 25 years old, so again, that's a knock against him. He's a little bit of an older prospect, but he was a really productive player at BYU. He was the 33rd ranked linebacker out of 211 linebackers in Dane Brugler's pre-draft rankings. And Tooley, as I mentioned, was super productive. He got better and better each year at BYU. 2020, his stats dipped a little bit from 2019, but that was because he played less games because of the pandemic shortened season. But then he really hit the ground running after that. A really good 21, 22, and then 23, he was awesome. This guy's been a coverage monster. He's been a pain in the butt for quarterbacks that have played BYU over the past couple of seasons. He's got 7 interceptions to his name, including 2 defensive touchdowns. He had almost 100 tackles this past year for the Cougars. And I mentioned that he's pretty athletic. His athletic testing, again, pro day stuff and bringing some of those numbers in there, so it's not as clean. But his athletic testing is as good and maybe even better than some of the top linebackers drafted. Athletically, he out-tested Edrin Cooper from Texas A&M out athletically in a couple of these drills. He out-tested Peyton Wilson, who was the freaky athlete at the linebacker spot. And checking in at 6'2", over 220 pounds, Tooley's a fun player to watch. When you start thinking about the linebacker room and you start thinking about who's in the equation, obviously we know about Azeez Al-Shire and Christian Harris. Jamal Hill was a 6th-round pick by the Texans. He formerly played safety and now is playing linebacker. And then, of course, Henry To'o and Jake Hansen are on the team. Tooley's a player to watch, the BYU linebacker, Max Tooley. Keep that name in the back of your mind. And finally, wrapping it up here as we highlight some of these undrafted free agents, British Brooks from North Carolina, the University of North Carolina. Now, best I could tell, he's not actually British, with the exception of just his name. But this is a guy that was set to be the starting running back, for the Tar Heels before an injury cratered his 2022. And immediately once he woke up out of surgery, he told Mac Brown, I'm coming back next year. I'm going to play. And then he played a season. He was somewhat productive. He had 100 yards in one of the early games for the Tar Heels, but he was used sparingly in the offense. An old scouting report from the middle of his time in North Carolina touted his vision as something to pay attention to. But he's a little bit slower than most, but sometimes zone backs can overcome the athletic testing speed with their play speed on the field. And of course, you can never have too many options when it comes to running back. It's a tough and crowded running back situation. Obviously, Joe Mixon is at the top, followed by Damian Pierce, Jawhar Jordan, Dare Agumbawale, and a couple of players left over from last season's practice squad, and Jared Dokes and J.J. Taylor. But again, just got to get in there, get some opportunities, make yourself known to the coaches, and hope you stick around. And let me tell you, of all of the undrafted free agents, Phildarius Payne's got a pretty good argument for it, but I think British Brooks has the best name of all the undrafted free agents. If you're still watching at this point, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch all the way to this point. You've watched the entire breakdown of the draft class and even some of the undrafted free agents. Well, rookie minicamp right around the corner, coming your way Friday and Saturday. Plenty of stuff right here on the channel about that. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Throw me a thumbs up on this big, long video. And I appreciate you watching. I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.